Welcome to another session of We Connect, where we explore the ideas, companies, and key players that continue to raise the bar in eDiscovery.
Today, we're going to be talking about the eDiscovery Bootcamp, ways you can win your case in understanding search. And our goal here today really is to kind of help you understand the limitations of search. I hate to say it, that kind of in that kind of way, but we want to help you understand where searches fit in and how they fit into this whole eDiscovery world. But I am going to turn my video off just so you guys have the full screen there. But my name is Gavin Maines. I'm the CEO of Avansic eDiscovery and Digital Forensics. And we switched new platforms. I've already warned everybody. We're kind of figuring out how to do this. Ian, go ahead and say hi to us today. And, we're kind of just getting right off here. So why don't you introduce yourself and jump right into,
Sure.
this search goal idea.
Yeah, I appreciate the patience, and sorry, I've got time zone-itis here. Again, my name's Ian Campbell. I'm the founder and CEO of iConnect. I think, when Gavin and I first spoke about doing the session today, one of my first focus I think that I wanted to share with everybody is that we end up with several different camps of people that certainly use our software and I think deal with eDiscovery issues. One of them is that we find some people are doing very much of an investigative review. They're searching for something. They're not doing an eyes on all review. They don't have a team of people going next. They're really laser focusing in on trying to find something. I think the other thing that we see is that some people like to pretend they have no documents and they want to go find stuff and add it to a bucket and go find stuff and add it to a bucket and then sort of build up from zero, which is a little different than, I'm going to say, the old school way of doing it, where let me start with everything and I'm going to go through everything and start to categorize and organize everything. So I think the one thing, Gavin, that you and I had spoken about as we were prepping for this is that what we're going to show today are some sort of tips and tricks that I think will work for both. So whether your searching philosophy is start with everything and cut away the things you don't want to focus in on the stuff you do want, or you want to start with zero and sort of move, sort of build your focal point from there. I think these strategies will work with either of those. And
I totally agree on that. Yeah. And, when we think about the strategies out here, he talked about expanding, are you looking for the smoking gun, or are you trying to do a document review because you have some discovery request? We've also seen now internal investigations are heavily using eDiscovery technology, and we're trying to figure out, did something go out? Was there a transaction that occurred? And so when you talk about the overall strategy that we're all used to, people call searching, filtering, culling. There's a lot of different words that all kind of mean the same thing. You're kind of making things smaller. And so when you think about a filter, people think a filter is where you're taking, a date or a custodian or a file type, and you're trying to shrink that down. And some of our classic ways of doing that, and we've shown this on other webinars, is, well, I don't know what I'm looking for, like Ian said. And so I might use something like an iView or a graph and say, show me all the email addresses that are in here. Oh, there's a bunch from this person. And so search has kind of evolved beyond, I'm going to type a keyword or I have to know what I'm looking for. Now the computer is kind of helping us. Just like when you're shopping online, the application is kind of giving us suggestions on one out there. And so we'll cover that. We'll cover keywords. We'll talk about threading and concept search kind of towards the end. And then we have a part 2 of this webinar coming out in a few weeks where we're going to really dive into some case studies and show you how particular searches were, in some cases, perturbed to make things work within a particular application. But right off the bat, we kind of have to go back to basics. And I'm talking about high school. If you guys all remember high school or grade school or whatever you want to call it, wherever you're from. And we're talking about and, or, and not, the very basic operators. And when you use these individually, and, great. When you use or all by itself, you're great. But when you start combining these things, that's where disaster starts occurring. And we have a blog post that just came out recently that kind of described, how some of these things get put together. And just to be very clear, and limits, this and this makes things smaller. Or expands in some cases, this or this makes it bigger. And then not is kind of a funny thing. because not is misused more often than other things. Because if you say, I'm looking for all the documents that have Ian and not, or Ian not Gavin, then it's going to find everything that has Ian in it, but doesn't have the word Gavin. And some people are often trying to say, well, I want to find all the ones where it's not both of them or different combinations out there. So these very basic search logics, we always have to go back to. And as proficient as I am in all of this searching, I still regularly take my search terms that I got from a client and give them to Lance or Meredith or one of my other partners, or even to talk to iConnect and say, what did I do wrong? Because you're going to miss an operator, you're going to miss a quote, you're going to misunderstand what the exclamation point means, or you're going to put a star, kind of in the wrong place, and you're not going to get what you want. But we're going to show you a step that you should be using almost all the time when you're doing searching, because it helps you understand the results of your search. So when you think about compounding, that's where we enter the danger zone. That's not a trademark. I can use that, right? We're headed out there in that danger zone out there. And that's where we talk about something very simple like Bob and Joe or Ted. And Bob and Joe or Ted, there's three things on the screen there. And when you put the parentheses in, you get significantly different meanings from that same phrase. That's called order of operations that can be controlled by parentheses. If Lance was here, we would be talking about a language called Lisp, L-I-S-P, which we call lots of silly, irritating parentheses. And it was a programming language that just everything had to be encapsulated in parentheses, very much like you see on the screen. And the other thing we have to talk about is, can you compound just the basic operators, or can you start putting in things like withins or near? So the language at the bottom is just to explain what these things mean. That's not a correct syntax, just to be clear. Don't quote me on that. But Bob and parentheses near or within 25, something I want to find, is going to say, I'm looking for the word Bob, and I'm looking for a document that has the some word near something I want to find. And so there's ways you combine these compound operators together. I mean, Ian, there's so much we can talk about within these basic operators, but we don't want to bore everybody, completely to death. But yeah. Have you really talked? I mean, the syntax is just there, and you guys did something very unique in that you own the syntax versus trying to just replicate someone else. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So in the early days of iConnect, way back in the day, I mean, a lot of people were using the concordances and the summations of the world, and they got very used to just doing sort of simple operators and simple combinations. I think, you talked about high school. You have to kind of go back to grade school. I think we all remember that the times sign and the divide sign take priority over plus signs and minus signs. And that's what we're dealing with here. The way we sort of organize all that, anybody who's on Facebook every now and then, you get one of those crazy math questions where there's no parentheses, and we're all supposed to try to remember back to grade 4, what's the order of operators. That's kind of what this is. But I think adding clarity to it, adding those parentheses is huge. And I think the other thing is that as we've moved forward, we have had originally a way to search concordance, and then we moved to a way to search Oracle, and then a way to search SQL. Coming out with our V11 later this year, we're going to be using Elastic as a backend. And so from that perspective, our goal has always been keep it really simple for the users, regardless of what we are using on the back end. For the engine which is doing the searching. And keeping in mind, the index is nothing more than, I always call it, a big dictionary of every word in every document. That's all you really have to remember. It's just a big dictionary. And you're going in and going, oh, does that word exist? Oh, does that word exist? If that word exists, how many times does it exist? And then immediately point me to which documents does it exist in. And I think that's really that's the root of what we're getting at here with searching, is that we have collectively found very simplified ways to make it easy for you to find stuff. You just need to define what the stuff is.
Yeah, when you kind of elevate out of that search, you're talking about what other things in search do. We talked about their basic, this and this and or this. Well, there's other extensions that the underlying search technology might have. And the most common out there, we'll talk about it later, is called DT search, but there's a lot of people moving to Lucene and these other elastic style searching as well. But proximity searches after basic searching is the most common after that. Some people think stars are very important, and star is actually probably a misused item the most. When you say star, it probably means you don't know what you're looking for. So you haven't done any sampling, or you can't do any sampling. And so we tell people to use stars carefully, or at least when you do use a star, which means everything. If I type in GA star, I'm going to get Gavin. I'm also going to get Gavusto. I'm going to get all kinds of other words that I didn't really probably intend to mean, because I didn't know what I was looking for. And different operators, for instance, in SQL, the star is actually represented by a %sign. And so there's all this different confusing operators that exist out there. When you think about wildcards as well, we'll talk about this case study in our next big webinar, but we had a case where we had to search for gas cans. And so gas, star, gasoline can, all these other ideas we had to actually search for, because people call them different things. And so you got to start with something and then build it out. And in a few minutes, I'll show you the demo of how we understand what stars mean, because there's some features built into search term reports that allow you to actually see what it expanded in the dictionary. Ian mentioned that the index is nothing more than a dictionary. Well, I would like to read the dictionary. I don't want to be hidden behind me. I want to see what's in it. And so there's other operators out there, even fuzzy searching, stemming, yada, yada, yada. I'll click on a help menu in a little bit, and I'll show you what some of the built-in operators are. But the other commonly misused, and I hate to be negative, I'm supposed to be positive in some way for this, but is quotes. The misunderstanding of how quotes work and what they do, and what happens if I have a single quote within my quote, and other examples like that. How do I combine a quote with a star? And how does the search interpreter going to deal with all that? And when we talk about the sample documents, we'll get into the demo in a minute, but that's just keyword. And here we are almost 15 minutes in, and we've only talked about one of the type of searching. There's a lot of other searching out there. They're searching for metadata, they're searching for coding and foldering, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on. And when we go into searching, we're still thinking about this keyword. And so we also warn people that numbers are something that's actually really hard to search for a lot. When you want to look for 10%, that's a very complicated search to look for, because the % symbol is a reserved word. You probably didn't index it. And how numbers are we going to look at? And the other thing about numbers is a lot of search indexers treat numbers as having stars on either side automatically. And so the example, when you search for 10, it actually might return 100, 101, 9, 10, just depending on how that search has been configured. And I'll show you, we're not nerdy yet. There's one more. We are going to dive off a cliff into the nerd world in a little bit later in the webinar, where I'm going to talk about noise words and configurations. But understanding how the search works and understanding its limitations will make you way more successful with search. And limitations is not a bad word. It's just understanding when I run the search, I'm going to get this results, which is those last two things that are on the slide there. Wildcards, I don't want you to use them as often as you should, because you should know what you're looking for. But it's also difficult because of things like nicknames. Billy, Bill, William, whatever. In the oil spill litigation down in the BP oil spill, they call a oil derrick a Christmas tree. Why? Because it looks like a Christmas tree, I guess. And so they never referred to it as the drilling rig. It was a Christmas tree. We had no idea about that because we weren't in that business. And so when you go out to slang, and then you extend the search capabilities out to things like text messages and short messages and Slack and chatting, now you've got misspellings and all these other more complicated issues that we have to deal with in search. So when we think about search, we just talked about search terms. What are we going to do now that we might have all this stuff? And Ian, do we just deal with this pile, or do we want to do something else?
Yeah, and Gavin, maybe if you could give me the screen for a second, I can actually show the folks on the phone, because I think the one of the interesting things is, I think you just have to kill sharing on your end.
Yes, I agree.
Because one of the things is, oh, there we go. Okay, perfect. Because one of the things is, now that I've got Now that I've gone through and I've gone and found the information I'm looking for, and Gavin, can you see my screen okay?
Okay, let's kill our video so they have a full screen of it as well.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, so I'll just go into a database here. We're actually in the iConnect platform, but I think regardless of what tool any folks on the phone are using, some of this will be quite relatable. So for example, I go in, I've got my thumbnail view right here in front of me, but if I want to go in now and I want to do a search for the word knee, for example, I now that quickly can go in and very quickly go and find every document that contains the word knee. And if I now wanted to go in and actually go and look at one of those documents, I can come in, I can look at it. I can look at it in the viewer. The viewer actually shows me where the word knee is. In this case, it'll actually highlight it for me. So that way, I've got lots and lots of options in and around. You see the word knee is highlighted, and I can sort of bounce through every one of those words. Further to that, not quite search, but I've turned on word marking, so you can see here that femoral is actually a marked word. So even though I didn't search for it, what I've gone and told the software is go and mark it for me as I'm navigating through. What I wanted to show you though is that if I go in and I say, okay, great, now that I did this search, I'm now in a subset, see I'm in 225. I can go even further than that. And then you say, oh, what I really want is I want these documents right here. So now I'm in a search of all the documents that contain the word knee. Visually, I'm looking at it in thumbnail mode, and now I've gone and selected some records. What can I now do with those? Well, this is where I've got a ton of different options. I could, in fact, have a whole series of different folders over here. I've got John's folder. This is information I want to share with John, who's involved in the project, and I can literally go and drag those over and drop those into John's folder. Further to that, what I might do is I might want to do something with these records. I might want to PDF them. I might want to share them. And we've got a little item here called mass action. I've got everything turned on. Usually an end user wouldn't have this level of selection, but you can see here, instead of doing an action on the entire record set, I can, if I wanted to, just do an action on my search results, which is my 225, or I can do an action on the 5 that I selected, or I can do an action on the inverse of that, which is the 220. And look what I can do. I can code them, cluster them, export them to PDF. I can have a template set up where I have a specific, maybe a chronology report that I want to run, which is a predefined report template. I can redact them, modify them, edit them, run a find and replace, delete them. We probably don't want to give that to some of your novice reviewers, but again, that can all be set up through security. But ultimately, it gives you a lot of capability to, once you go and find these documents, to be able to do something with them. And I think that's part of the end game. It's part of the decision-making process, Gavin, that as someone thinks through, we talked about earlier, do I want to build up or scrub down to sort of build out a group of documents which are specifically important to me? Well, why are they important to me? And what do I want to do with them once I find them? And I think that's kind of what we're trying to show here, is that part of the process is not just search, search, search. It's search and then do what? Search and put into folders. And maybe I want those 5 in a folder, but I also want, I'm going to cherry pick a few of these other ones here and say, I also want those into my folder for John, who's my expert. I want him to review as well. And then when I go back in and have a look in John's folder, I can actually see not only the documents I put into John's folder for an expert to review, but documents that other people put into that folder as well. So again, think of it from the perspective of, once I'm doing a search, now what? What do I actually want to do with these documents now that I've found them? Gavin, back to you.
Yeah, and we're going to stay with iConnect here because what I'm going to do is I want to show you how we kind of deal with the next step. So let me get my screen share here again. And when we kind of mentioned what Ian was just talking about is, what are we going to do now that we have some documents we're going to look at? Well, maybe you've got too many documents, you just don't know it. And so there's this concept called search term reports, and various platforms have different ways of explaining this. You know, some of them are great, some of them are pretty poor. You know, some of the Office 365 ones, you get this report out and it's kind of nebulous as to what it means. It takes kind of a computer expert to understand. But what I'm going to show you is, I have a very simple database, and I apologize in advance. I go to Enron all the time just because it's nice and boring. We can dust it off and play with it. And in here, I've got some searches I want to run. And so these are the various searches you can see in this text pad document right here that I can run. And if I go and actually run one of these searches, let's do, full analysis. If I paste that in just like English, I could run that search, and I could sit here and I could go through and say, okay, there were no hits for that one. And I could sit here and do it that way. Well, no, that doesn't give me a lot of guidance on that. And so a lot of platforms do have a search term report functionality built in. And I'm going to show you how to use that and what it means. And I've also pre-run these just so there's some different speed here. So in this report manager, I can simply go in and choose new. I can give it, and I generally call an STR, then I put the date, and then I put maybe a number after it in some cases. I scroll over, I'm going to do a search term report. And now I'm going to say I want to have grouping. And that'll make sense in a minute when I show you the output of the report, because the report's going to show us this review burden and all these other ideas. I can also run a search on a specific folder if I want to, see some results from an opposing party or look at my own. And it's as simple as going and finding that text document I have, uploading it, and then here are all my terms, not very many, and then I can hit go and it'll run it. And so I told you I've already run this in advance. And so I'm going to download the results of that search term report. It's going to give me a CSV, which I'm going to open here in Microsoft Excel. And I think, let me see if I need to make it any bigger for everybody else. That looks pretty good. So in this case, what I do is I kind of bring it over here so I can see all the data. And what do I see here? And some of this might not make a lot of sense to a lot of you, but I'm going to explain what these things are. Up at the top, I have some statistics. And right off the bat, it's going to tells me it searched 264,000 documents. And it says that I need to probably review 26,000 of them. That's too much is always the answer. Right, Ian, always people say, my search returned too many results. How do I reduce it? And that's exactly what we're going to do here. So looking just as a novice right now, I might look at these and I might go and sort them by the document hit count from largest to smallest. They were in alphabetical order. Now I'm looking at what had the biggest hits. And I'm looking at this word special purpose, and I'm looking at the document hit count, and I'm saying that is a massive amount of hits for the word special purpose. And what I'm actually realizing right now when I look through these is all these other searches look really good, but this special purpose, when I go back to my original search terms, it probably should have had quotes around it, because I was looking for the phrase special purpose, not the word special or purpose. And so in this case, looking at the search term report, I was able to realize that I made a mistake in my searches, which caused me to have a ton more hits than I probably should have had. And so that's one of the ways we use the search term report. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to fix that search term by doing special purpose, saving it, going through that same operation I just did, and that will generate actually this list, which I'll download now, this .2 version. And we bring this same, it's the same thing except for special purpose now has quotes around it. We can see that now special purpose in this case only has 178 hits. I finally got what I'm looking for, but if I didn't do this operation, I might have misinterpreted or misunderstood what happened here. So there's a few other things that happen in this search term report that are really helpful. If you recall, remember I told you be careful using stars? Well, stars can mean all kinds of things, but these phrases right here, all these phrases that I've highlighted, all come from the RAPTOR star term. That term by itself generated 434 hits, or documents that have that word in there at least once. And if you look now, what iConnect is telling me here are all the words that it interpreted out of the star. So now I can know Raptor. I don't know what Raptor privates is, but they only got me one. I probably don't care about that. Raptors, that may not be the same thing, because now I'm dealing with a plural version of the word raptor, and maybe that's birds and the other stuff is what I'm talking about. And as I scroll down, you can see I've also got the stemming version of this as well. And so in this case, inflate, I'm looking for the word like inflate of numbers or inflate your balance sheet. And so inflatable is probably not a word I care about, but inflate, inflated, inflates, inflating, inflation. Now, inflation is probably not something I'm looking for. So I might be able to say, find me all the documents, might be able to take these words, these actual results, now that I've looked at the search term report. Come on, click off. There we go. And instead of using the inflate hat, I'll go to my search term report and I'll replace that with the actual words that I'm looking for, because now I can get rid of the word inflation. And so that's now two things we've shown you that you can look in the search term report and realize, oh, I can improve my search by using this type of tool and technology. So the next step we're going to cover is I'm going to talk about what these various columns mean, and in some cases misinterpreted how they could be misleading, but what they actually mean. So the first column here is very straightforward. How many documents had this word in it at least once? Notice I said at least once, not how many times does this word appear in the database, how many documents had this word at least once. And in this case, I got 5,000 here, 5,000 here, 1,000 down here. And so I would say the spread on this is there's no documents anymore that are causing a huge list of like 10,000 or so. And in fact, my review burn is only 11,000. Now, as I move over to the right column, because we have families and things like that, the right column might, and normally it would be bigger because you have attachments that have hits into them. And so the document might be an attachment to an email, but when you're going to go do the review, you actually have to review the email and all the other attachments. So that family document hit count is generally going to be larger, and it's going to tell you what the review burden might be. This last column is one of the more important columns when you're negotiating search terms with an opposing party, if you really want to do that, or if you're trying to establish your own search terms. This tells us, and I'm going to sort by that last column, unique document hit count, largest to smallest. What this means is that means this word, or bankruptcy, we'll pick on the second one, of the 11,000 documents that returned in our search term report, 4,000 of them only had the word bankruptcy in it and not any of my other terms. So that'll make a little bit more sense when we look down further where we see special purpose. 81 documents only had the word special purpose and not any of our other terms, versus we had 178 documents. And so this is a way we can review search terms and determine, is this search term being too aggressive? Do we need to put a qualifier on it? Should we put some other date filter on it? What should we do when we're dealing with this type of search? So search term report's an iterative process. You go back to it quite often, and it lets you understand if the syntax of your query is actually producing results. The final thing I'm going to tell you, and this is kind of a trick here, is this fabricate near records is producing 0 hits. Full analysis is 0 hits. So looking at your 0 hits, your low hits as well, to make sure you didn't misspell something, or if it's not actually what you're looking for, to go out and modify that. And so that's kind of the basics of search term reports. If you should play with them, you should work with them as much as you can, because I think it's going to make you a better user of search terms. So we do have a poll that I'm going to throw out right now. It's a very simple poll. It's the question is, how often do you, how do you conduct most of your searches? Are you using keywords? Are you combining it with advanced analytics? Are you combining everything? And then someone else is doing my searching for me, which is a common answer. So don't feel bad about saying someone else always does my searching, because often in our lab environment, someone else is doing the first set of searching, and then I'm going to go and do that final set of searching a little bit later on. Ian, any final comments on the search term report before we move on?
No, I mean, I think the only other thing I would mention is that if there's a group of words that maybe are specifically related to an expert, and you want them to look at anytime one of these pharmaceutical terms shows up, you want a specific expert to look at them, you can in fact auto folder those results as well. And you could say any results that contain from any of these specific words, put them in that folder. And that's another way that people use search term report to start to organize their data early.
Go ahead and give you guys the results of the poll here. You can see that there's a mixed bag in there, but about 50% of you are using kind of all of the searching together. And it may not be that you use all that searching together all the time, but it did say, how do you connect most of your searches? So I'm happy that a lot of you kind of moved on beyond the search term. Search terms are not dead. They're just kind of taking a little hiatus for a while on some various things like that. So kind of our next discussion we want to get into is, how is the data being searched? And so remember, I promised we would get a little bit more nerdy. I'm going to reserve myself to under 5 minutes to cover these next 3 slides. So when you talk about searches, the most common search we deal with is index search. When you search the internet using a search engine, the search engine went out, read all the documents on the internet, and created a big index that you're searching against. It's a very fast search. Live search is where you're actually using a sliding window or some other technology to go and re-look at all the documents. And in eDiscovery, and especially in digital forensics, we do still use live searching because of some things I'll talk about later in a slide or two about the way the indexes work. But there's two other types of searching that people either confuse with index searching or don't realize that it's actually something slightly different. And that's cluster-based searching, which is also more like this, find similar. It's all this analytics type searching, and then also metadata searching. You can't run a keyword search against a date time field. You have to give it a properly formatted date and time. And so that's not actually searching against an index. It's actually searching the live results and whatever the source of truth is, whether it's a Lucene index or a SQL index or something, modest or something else that's behind there. So when your data is searching, you have to understand which indexes I'm going about. Now, Ian and his tool has kind of made it simple where all the searching happens in one dialog box. Some other tools, you actually have to tell it what index you're going against. And when I talk about what index you're going against, different softwares have different ways of handling what's inside of and what's inside of the search and what gets indexed. The main operators and or are always the same. The major difference between the operators on all these various carriers is when I type in that whole special space purpose without quotes, is the search interpreter going to put an and in there, or is it going to put an or in there? And you just don't know unless you understand that search technology. So here's a couple up here. I'm not going to bore us with this because I have about a minute left to get these next two slides, but DT search is the most common. It has a very simple syntax. There's something called pre that most of you probably never knew about because you always use within. Pre means Apple and then doctor versus within means Apple, then doctor, or doctor and then Apple. It'll carry for both of those. In Office 365, they use near and near, which is the same kind of concept. And then in Lucene, it's crazy. Lucene is a reverse notation language. And so it's kind of if you think about reverse Polish notation calculators and those old calculators from before I was in school, honestly, but though where you're putting the operator at the end. And then Elastic is even more complicated because it uses JSON. And if you don't know what JSON is, you probably don't want to learn at this point in your life. So most of these search operators are kind of collapsed up into a very easy language, and a search interpreter will interpret it. The most important thing about the technology I just showed you is understanding what words are completely ignored. How is white space counted? And in Office 365, there's not a lot of white space. It's a very small, limited set of white space. In most of the cases, that's calling it white space because those operators do something. Parentheses obviously mean something, so we can't search for one. A star means something, so we can't necessarily search for it. Lucene, we expand that a little bit because they have some extra and or operators. DT search, this is where it gets interesting. DT search has a default configuration that almost every eDiscovery vendor uses and every platform uses. And most people don't know that there's 3 files that control that. And the most common examples are out there in the default is these lists of white space characters. And Elastic is another configuration that actually depends on who deployed the Elastic because it comes empty. But at the end, the last bullet there, noise words, stop words, and stop lists. These are words that the index that when it does indexing, it's just going to completely ignore and treat them as white space. So the example of that is, remember gas can earlier when we talked about searching for gas space can. If you search for the gas can in quotes even, can is a noise word. It's a word that's too common. There's about 120 default words in most DT search deployments that are just completely ignored. Why, can, thanks, the, a, and you can go on and on forever. But when I search for gas can or gas star can, I'm actually just searching for gas star because the can is just thrown away. So understanding how noise words work, and actually we have a search tool that you run your searches against it, and it tells you here are the noise words that are in your list of search terms, and it highlights them all for you. It's a simple Excel program that we wrote to help us look at our search terms before we actually run them.
I remember having a client at one point, Gavin, and they were, it was Bank of America was involved in the project. And they knew that throughout the database was B of A. And at the time, I think it was an old concordance database, B and A were stop words and of was the stop word. And it was quite a challenge to get the system to figure out a way to actually search for B of A. We figured out a way to do it, but that's the kind of challenges that, again, it's great to be able to sort of check that before you jump in and assume you're going to be able to find everything.
Exactly. And that's where we go back to live searches. And in iConnect, there's a secret way to run searches directly against the SQL index. So you can actually, I won't tell you the operation because it really trashes the SQL server hard, but you can run that B of A search directly against the text that's stored in SQL by using a particular operator within the iConnect system. So having that capability that's how we look for the percent signs and things like that. So when we're thinking about improving our search, it has to work on text. So this is just the whole idea here is garbage in, garbage out. If you get PDFs or TIFF files and they're just raster images instead of vector and have text, you need to OCR them and do things like that. Some of the OCR technology, especially some of the stuff that's included for free, is really good. We've got pictures of a flood, and it was reading the word Dr. Pepper on the side of soda boxes sitting way in the back. And so it's kind of an interesting thing because we were looking for a pepper spray that caused some kind of issue. And this pepper, these couldn't figure out why all these pictures of the soda machine were coming up. And that's one of the reasons out there. So there is some pre-work that has to happen. And just to reiterate, be very careful with wildcards. Ian, I'm going to let you kind of have the rest of this on this last slide here and let me know if you want to share again on that.
Yeah, if I can share, that would be great. Actually, just hold that up for a second, Gavin. So, there are lots of other things to search. I mean, it's not necessarily that you're looking for a word. You might be looking for other information, and there's actually quicker ways to get there. For example, there's a dictionary lookup. You could conceptually cluster all your documents together. So everything related to Yankee season tickets is sitting sort of in a cluster. Everything related to bank deposits is sitting in a different cluster. Conceptual searching, being able to find a document and then using artificial intelligence, say, hey, go find me more documents that are talking about stuff like this. And you talked earlier, Gavin, about the oil rig and the Christmas tree. Imagine, if you will, there's a document talking about some kind of an oil spill, and disaster that happens on an oil rig. And then there's another one that has similar context talking about some incident that happened. It happens to refer to it as a Christmas tree. So I think from that perspective, that's where conceptual searching comes in, because the keyword you're looking for might not be there, but conceptually all the other words are talking about the same thing. Things like document similarity, finding a document and then potentially looking for other documents that are near duplicates. Near duplicate detection is a big thing because you may have different versions of a contract, for example, and if you found one of them, you might say, "Ooh, go and gather for me all of the other ones that are, let's say, 80% matching this document." And relatively quickly, when I say relatively quickly, within seconds, it will bring back, along with a confidence score, all the other documents that have either the same content or almost the same content, and you can now mask code one way or the other. The ability, of course, I had that John folder open earlier, the ability for me to then click on the John folder, immediately do a search of everything that's in the John folder. So I used searches to put it in the John folder, and now I'm using the John folder as a search unto itself. The ability to then combine things and only look for a word or a phrase in the documents that are in the John folder. And this is some of the interesting stuff that we're going to talk about next week, is the ability to start to build those workflows to meet specific business needs. It's when you take the basics of search and you kind of move the pieces around a little bit, you can do some really complex, interesting stuff and solve some really, really complex search problems by simply doing things in a certain order. Finally, the one I'll talk about on here, or the two I'll talk about, one of them is charts and graphs. I'll actually just show that in a second. The other one, and Gavin, if you can just give me the screen, searching comments. One of the things we have within the iConnect platform is the ability to make a comment on a document. Think of it like a blog. So when I'm on a record and I see something I'm interested in, let's say this document right here, I can come in and actually make a comment on that record right here, and I can just make a new comment. And I'll just say, check this out. I can share that with someone in my team. So this is like a little internal conversation thread that I can have There's a little mailbox here that'll actually help me understand notifications from other members of my team. But again, what we're doing here, these comments are actually searchable. So I can actually go and create with my team different ways to use these comments as a way to add additional metadata or additional commentary, and then go and search the comments. The last thing I wanted to show, just to kind of wrap up, is how simple it is for me to go, you know what, I don't really know what I'm looking at here. I know these documents all came from different people, but can you just give me a visual representation of what I'm looking at? And there you go. That quickly, it went into a metadata field. It carved it up into a pie chart, and you can go, oh, what I really want is I want the stuff from O'Kane, and I want the stuff from B. Mazinski and C. Monahan. And look what I'm doing up at the top. I'm, in fact, searching. So I'm using a pie chart to create a search. And again, so I took the metadata, I tallied the metadata, displayed it as a pie chart, then went one step further and created a search out of it. And if I really, really like this, I can even go one step further, and I could, in fact, go and share this chart with members of my team, such that when they log in, they can actually go to a dashboard, and what they'll have in front of them is not only a bunch of functions they can do, they can also go in here and they can actually see that diagram that I created just a few minutes ago, and they can use that dynamically as a search tool as well. So again, search is not always looking for a keyword. Sometimes it's using combinations of search to build a workflow. I know we're tight on time, Gavin, so back to you.
Yes, that was a great demonstration there on that piece. I have one more poll as we kind of finish our way out here. And I wanted to point a few things out while we're asking this poll. The poll is really, do you have a guidebook that you work from, or you kind of just guess every time? And I'm going to give you my answer right now. The answer is really no. I mean, I have a guidebook on things that I follow, but it's so competitive on what the client wants and what they need and what their perception is that I generally have to build a guidebook or a coding manual or something like that for everyone there. So, when you think about the guidebook for search, it's intrinsic knowledge in my brain because we're doing it every day and I have a team. But as an individual, it might be something that you might want to look at, do this and not that kind of concept. So to kind of end us out here, I wanted to point out one more thing on what Ian said once I find my Zoom. And we'll talk in a few weeks. We're going to have our next webinar is going to be on July 13th. So not next week, but July 13th. So look forward to seeing you on that. We're going to cover these search strategies, and we're going to put them into context by talking about how did this particular search actually help us, out in that case out there. So my last thought there really is, I really look forward to seeing you guys in a few weeks. We're going to show you how we can search for redactions and search for other things, and how we can do inverse searching where we're comparing inbound productions against what we produced outside to determine really what came in there. But my last comment is, there's no such thing as a stupid question, but there are very stupid searches. So we all make mistakes. We agree to search terms in advance. We don't understand what they deal with, and we are constantly going back to negotiate. But most every vendor out here is going to come and say, let me help you run that search. Let me show you how to run that search, versus just say, no, you really can't do that. So, reach out to us, ask us a lot of questions. Ian, any final thoughts?
No, I think that's a great point. I mean, we have seen searches that literally would take up an 8.5, 11 piece of paper with 30 to 40 levels of parenthetic logic with probably 100 to 150 terms inside them. Those are the kind of searches that people, they're out there, and sometimes they need to do. And to your point, we're happy to help them. You're happy to help them, because again, obviously, if we can help them meet that business need, we're more than happy to do it.
Well, thank you very much, Ian. Thank you, everybody. I'm sorry we went a little bit over. This will be on demand, available for you as well. Enjoy the rest of your day.
We Connect, brought to you by iConnect, making information accessible.